Welcome to Christ the Lord, Clearwater's weekly message. I'm Pastor John Backus here in our studio in Clearwater, Florida, where we share the good news of Jesus on the Gulf Coast. You're joining us for part 2 of a 4-part message called Meet Me Inside, a series on mental and emotional health. We believe that our community is a part of the nationwide mental health crisis that began about 18 months ago, as nearly 40% of people are struggling with depression or anxiety or a challenge with addictive patterns in their lives. Because the church is a place of seelsorga, soul care of the soul, we want to do what we can to build up and take care of you and your inner life. And that's why we're offering this message series. In part 1, we talked about the blessing that comes through emotional connection and how we suffer when we are in emotional isolation. Emotional connection comes through safe relationships, places in life where we're next to people and we don't have to be on high alert playing defensively against them. We can relax and know that we're safe and loved. But not every relationship automatically is that. In a safe relationship, you have the power to say no to people controlling or hurting you. But sadly, once we're in a relationship, we might find that it's easy to lose that sense of freedom. As an illustration of how relationships can be difficult, I'll take you back in my life to when I was learning how to ride a bike. I wasn't very good at it at first, and I ended up careening straight into a tree. I could see it coming. I just didn't know how to turn, and I didn't think it would be a good idea to just bail. Sometimes our relationships can be like that. We don't know how to turn or change the patterns that we find ourselves in. We feel pretty certain that we shouldn't just bail out of them, but with no change, we just keep on continuing until something bad happens. An example of this fear that the relationships that we're in will destine us for a crash. I'll take you back years ago to a conversation I had with a young couple who met with me as a pastor, and they were ready to join their lives intimately. They had plans to start a family. They're going to go together on a house mortgage, but they wanted me to know they weren't going to get married. They weren't interested in marriage because they said they saw the trap that their parents had gotten into, both of their parents' sets, and they saw the difficulty in their own parents' marriages and divorces that they said, we don't want to lock ourselves into that experience. They said, we reserve the right to bail out, and marriage doesn't allow for that. Since they're right, we marry forever till death do us part. And if marriage is a commitment that you cannot escape, at least morally we would say, then entering into it might feel like a trap. Or either you get trapped in marriage relationship, or you say, I'm going to avoid that type of intimate and deeply profound commitment altogether in life. I'm just never going to get myself that connected to somebody. I reserve the right in any relationship to bail. What if there were another way? What if instead of just saying, I can never be safe with another person, truly safe, what if we could say there are things you can do if you're on the bike to turn, to change course. So you don't have to jump off and you don't have to hit the tree. One of the ways that we can change the dynamics of relationships so that they are safe places that we want to be in is to practice healthy boundaries. That's today's theme, the blessing of boundaries. We all benefit from interpersonal boundaries. A boundary is where I end and somebody else begins. To use the illustration of property, if people were property, it would be me knowing where my house and yard and fence are and where you and your house and yard and fence are. When boundaries become soft or they are improperly adjusted, my boundary would stretch onto your property and I would take over some of your yard and move into your kitchen. Even though it's yours, I would claim it as mine, overstepping a boundary. A boundary can be unhealthy when the opposite happens, when a person fails to live up to the expectations of their boundary. When someone on their property says, yeah, I know we got weeds and garbage and there's smoke coming out of the furnace, but hey, you over there, You should take care of this, of my problems. Like Jesus would want you to help me, wouldn't he? You should take care of my problems, and I'm just going to be here and watch. An improper boundary. If a boundary is knowing where I end and somebody else begins, the blessings that come through a boundary means that it's kind of like we own the personal deed to ourselves. The boundary principle is found all over in the Scriptures, whether it's from the created universe that God put into place with His command, or He divided different environments, light there, dark here, waters above, waters below, land there, sea there, species here, stays in its own procreative channel, species here stays in its own procreative channel, and there are boundaries in the physical environment that keep our world working physically. There are also boundaries in morality, things that we say, lines that should not be crossed for the good of humanity. There are boundary principles in the Scriptures in all sorts of places, and I'd like you to look for them. Find the boundary principle in Galatians 6. Each one should test their own actions, then they can take pride in themselves alone, without comparing themselves to anyone else, for each one should carry their own load. There's the boundary principle. Personal responsibility. My duty to do my duty. However, in Galatians 6, there's other relationship principles. Here's verse 2. Carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. So even though I'm responsible for myself and you are responsible for yourself, I'm also responsible to you to help when you need it. Find the boundary principle. Ezekiel 18 verse 20, the one who sins is the one who will die. And Psalm 49 verse 7, no one can redeem the life of another or give to God a ransom for them. Each of us has our own relationship with God and is responsible for the outcome of our own actions. And yet we also are to live as good neighbors alongside those next to us. Leviticus 19, echoed by Jesus in the New Testament in the Gospel of Matthew, love your neighbor as yourself. There are two principles that are aligned right next to each other. And the principles are, I'm to be responsible for myself, and you are to be responsible for yourself. But the second principle is I'm to be responsible to you, my neighbor. I have a responsibility to show love to you, to do things that are kind and for your well-being. Responsible for myself and responsible to my neighbor. Now, those ways of behavior are generally formed naturally in the way God designed human development to take place. Let's talk next about how healthy boundaries typically form in life. It begins with a stage that we call hatching, like a new chick coming out of the egg. It's when a baby is born. The hatching stage is the phenomenon where a baby realizes mommy and me aren't the same. It's dissociative. We are no longer physically connected, but I'm outside of the womb, and I'm no longer connected, and if mommy's over there, I can scuttle away this way. The hatching phase. Mommy and me are not the same. With this new independence comes practicing, and practicing is going out into the world to see what I can do. And it might begin with the assumption I can do anything until there are consequences for what I do. Baby can't just go crawling off of the edge of the patio. Baby can't poke his finger into the electrical socket. Parents and the consequences of behavior work together to teach a child healthy boundaries of behavior. And when that works appropriately, a child settles into the stage called rapprochement. Rapprochement essentially is I know who I am and where the boundaries of behavior are that are good for me and other people. This last stage sounds like this. I can't do everything I want to. These three stages, hatching, practicing, and rapprochement, are the healthy boundaries that are built into human development. They form, however, not only in the area of birth to age 2, as a child comes to life, tests boundaries, gains independence, and then learns which boundaries they can live by. The same thing happens in a form in adolescence, where a young adult is no longer a grade school child, no longer pushed around in a stroller, but learns I can walk, I can drive, make decisions on my own, is nearly a grown-up, and is no longer just like mommy. But I'm a separate individual, maybe even with a separate life from what the life of my mom or parents were. And then the third area of life where this pattern takes place is in marriage, if you're married. A new relationship where the family of origin is no longer the defining culture that a young woman or man might live in. That mom or dad no longer is the boundary setter in my life, but now I've got a life partner, and it's him and me, or me and her, and we have to figure out now what our boundaries are and how we're going to act for each other's well-being and our own, and live within those boundaries. So all three stages are present in a healthy way, at least in these three stages of life. Now, if these boundaries are formed properly, we get to adulthood and we know how to apply personal boundaries. We understand that there's a boundary that's related to skin. Like there's a boundary I should follow, that I can't just reach out and touch you skin to skin. That would be an inappropriate boundary. If we would go to the workplace, your boss can't just put his hand across your neck or your chest or your back. That's a boundary that needs to be upheld in a healthy way. Another example of a boundary are the words we say, to say, I like this, I don't like that. Words express boundaries, the same way that touch expresses boundaries. Geographical distance can express boundaries, where we say there's something that is dangerous to me or discomforting, therefore I'm going to move over here. Physically relocating can be a sign of a boundary. The choice of how we use our time as an investment is a boundary. To be able to say, that's enough for now. I need a break. I need sleep. I need to recharge. I need to get away. I need some time on my own. I'll do more later. A boundary can also be knowing where consequences for behavior end up. Knowing that if I do the crime, it's appropriate for me to do the time. And if you do the crime, it's appropriate for you to do the time. That something is wrong in the world when I carry the consequences of your behavior, or you have to be disciplined for my behavior. If the consequences of our actions are not learned, then we have the process of enabling a dysfunction where through a desire to protect another, they never grow out of a unhealthy or inappropriate behavior pattern. An appropriate boundary of love can be an understanding that I have a moral obligation to act compassionately when someone near me is in pain. It's a broken human being who lacks empathy when we see a person suffering. Boundaries can look like many different things, but they can also sound like different things. These are boundary phrases that if you're in a safe relationship, you would feel it's okay to say. In fact, it's good to say these things because it helps you establish the personal deed to your own self to show where you stop and someone else starts. It's also a way for other people to know what the rules of your yard are so they can respect your boundaries. Boundaries sound like this. No. I disagree. I will not. I choose not to. It hurts. I want. It's wrong. That's bad. I don't like when you touch me there. Those are all boundary phrases that establish where I end and someone else begins. In a relationship, those are words that we use to create the safety that means we can trust one another with our well-being. don't have to be on playing defense, don't have to be on heavy alert, don't feel this fight or flight need in our life. And so we can have appropriate emotional connections with other people. However, boundary problems arise if somewhere in our life, in those three stages, either in 0 to 2 or adolescence or in the time of marriage, if hatching and practicing and don't take place, then rapprochement doesn't take place, and then we end up having boundary problems. For some people, the boundary problem is an inability to say no. When someone cannot say no, they end up living a frustrated life where they feel a lack of control, resentment, and anger. They feel guilty saying no and therefore end up being controlled by other people. A feeling of helplessness or powerlessness that leads to resentment. Other people have difficulty saying, yes, this is important for me to do. Someone might ignore the responsibility they have to love others. They might live with narcissistic tendencies, living only for self and not giving a concern about the well-being of people next to me. And so failing to live up, to offer anything to their neighbor, their family, or their community in terms of support. On the other hand, sometimes we have a problem not with what we can't say, but what we can't hear or don't want to hear. Someone has a boundary problem if they cannot hear the word no. They get infuriated when they're told no. Such a person might be typically aggressive with other people, overstepping their boundaries. They might act controlling, even in a passive way, to work to always be manipulating people, even if not head-on in a physical altercation. Then there's others of us who aren't good at yes. Yes, I need you close to me. Such a person might have a sense that they are worthless or lack value in the family or the community, and so they refuse or block care from others. They have a difficulty opening up and being honest and vulnerable about what their needs are. They can't say, yes, I need help. They may have been taught to be so independent and so they need to be strong in their life and never show weakness and solve your own problems, that when life is overwhelming, they don't know how to graciously receive love or support from other people. These are boundary problems that make our relationships kind of like my first ride on that bike, where I was on this thing and I was having trouble balancing. I wasn't having fun. I couldn't turn it, didn't know how to steer it in a new direction. I didn't know how to bail, so I just rode it till the bitter end and crashed into the tree. Some of you have done that. You might have that kind of story in your marriage right now or a previous marriage. You might have that story in your relationship with your mom or dad or your in-laws. You might have that relationship at work where boundaries are really soft or they don't exist appropriately, and it's making life difficult. If you've been responsible for boundary problems in the lives of someone else, we give ourselves to Jesus. We ask Him to give us a new heart. We accept the forgiveness that comes from Him and look to Him for wisdom in practicing boundaries with others appropriately. We know that Jesus gives us new beginnings. He promises us that through His death on the cross, we can leave behind patterns of shame and find worth and value and wisdom for living in Him. You aren't destined to repeat the struggle of a previous marriage or an unhealthy family dynamic in the future. You can build appropriate boundaries back by practicing in a safe place. That's why we're offering this message series to affirm these things in the safety of our church community. We hope that you practice them in your personal life. You can also find support in the practice or company of a local therapist, a licensed mental and family health counselor. You might consider reading some books on this topic, including Boundaries by Dr. Henry Cloud. But it's our hope that in our church community we can care for your soul by helping you recognize why at times you feel without value, you feel frustrated, resentment, or angry, and that you know how to overcome these feelings, replace bad patterns with good, and that you're not afraid of interpersonal connections with other people. You're not afraid of marriage commitments. You know how to build friendships that are strong, marriage that is enjoyable, and a family culture that is safe. May God give you these blessings as you apply and practice boundaries.